I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Punchbowl News. Welcome to Punchbowl News' HQ in Chicago at the DNC. For those of you who are just joining us, all right, I like it. We've had a really amazing day, starting with a CEO roundtable focused on energy, as well as Representative Lizzie Fletcher, the Democrat from Texas. We had an LSG polling conversation of the canvas, an ice cream social. I hope you all partook with that. And now we are going to close our main stage conversations with Senator John Hickenlooper, the Democrat from Colorado. He's going to be interviewed by our very own Andrew Desiderio, as Jake Sherman likes to say, our own captain of the Senate. We really hope that you stick around afterwards. We're going to have a toast by Salesforce to close out the HQ and toast the DNC. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Andrew and Senator Hickenlooper to the stage.
All right. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Senator, for joining us. Welcome to Chicago, everyone. We certainly got some good weather this week. I was just asking Senator Hickenlooper if the weather's better here or in his hometown of Denver, and your answer was unequivocally...
It's hard to beat the weather here, so I haven't been in Denver for 24 hours, but it's pretty nice in Denver right now, too.
Well, thank you, Senator, for being here for our conversation on News of the Day, the 2024 Democratic National Convention, as well as a look toward the 2024 election and, of course, beyond. We are streaming our editorial conversations on Twitter this afternoon, and as always, we encourage you guys to share photos and tag us on social media. You can find Punchbowl News at Punchbowl News on all social media platforms. Senator, thank you so much for being here. I want to start off asking you about something that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader of the Senate, told me yesterday. He said that if you guys have the majority next year, he's going to look at a potential filibuster carve-out for abortion rights. Obviously, a couple of years ago, you guys tried to do this with the carve-out for voting rights. You got 48 senators to support it. Obviously, the two who didn't support it were Senators Manchin and Sinema. They will not be in the Senate next year, and Senator Schumer expressed confidence that he could get there, could get the caucus there, assuming you guys have the majority. How do you feel about that, and specifically for applying it to abortion rights?
So there are a number of different ramifications that, I think if you're going to carve it out for one thing, it's pretty likely that it'll get carved out for something else, and then something else, and then when the next Congress comes in, maybe there's a different leader or a different party in charge, there would be different issues raised. And I think that has to be carefully thought through to recognize that this is a much larger decision than women's rights. And I do think that I think we can get, if we were going to go back and reinstate Roe v. Wade in legislation, I think it's not impossible to imagine we could do that with 60 votes. So my argument there if Chuck was here, I'd say, well, let's take a shot at 60 votes first. And he'd laugh at me and say, well, we'll see. Generally means I lose.
Well, if he were here, I would certainly invite him on stage and just let you two hash it out. One thing we've been hearing from elected Democrats ever since Kamala Harris became the presumptive Democratic nominee is that they have never seen this level of enthusiasm for a presidential ticket before. How can Democrats harness that enthusiasm and use that to actually secure victories in the campaigns this year, especially for Senate races where you guys are defending so many seats? You've got some really tough races, which I know we're going to delve into. But how do you harness that enthusiasm and actually transfer it into victories down the ballot?
Well, we've got a bunch of really hard states we're defending, but we have a bunch of really great candidates. And in terms of the enthusiasm, I was the mayor of Denver in 2008 when Obama brought a certain amount of enthusiasm into that city. And that was the last time I've seen anything close to this. The level of excitement and enthusiasm is off the charts. And I think one thing to remember is that this is self-propulsion. Now, there's a large number of uncommitted voters, people that don't vote very often, moderates, unaffiliated. They're sitting on the sideline, and they don't all vote based on just their values or the issues. A lot of them want to vote for a winner. I hate to say it sounds cynical, but there's a lot of people that will kind of come on board. When you start seeing hundreds of millions of dollars raised in a matter of days and weeks, when you look at hundreds of thousands of volunteers coming in, you suddenly look and say, Kamala Harris is going to win. And that's going to attract the next wave, and you're going to have this self-perpetuating energy that is going to help Democrats get everyone to the ballot, help transform the electorate in terms of how many young people vote, in which way do African-American males vote, all these different constituencies that had been appearing undecided or undecided at best in some cases. Suddenly they're looking like they're going to come back and vote Democratic, and I think that will go right down the ticket.
So there are a number of tough races, seats you guys have to defend this year. The two toughest, obviously, are Ohio and Montana.
Wait. Ohio and Montana? What about West Virginia?
I think that's already a flip for the Republicans.
Just checking. Thought maybe there'd been Manchin had gotten back in or something. I wasn't sure.
Well, he's not a Democrat anymore either, though. The way that Senators Tester and Brown can win, if they do win, is going to be by relying on ticket splitters, people who vote for Donald Trump in the presidential election, but then cross over party lines and vote for the incumbent Democrat for Senate. In this hyper-partisan era that we're in, is it even possible anymore for there to be that many ticket splitters in order to propel those two senators to victory?
It's a little bit unusual, but I don't think it's going to be that big a problem. In one sense, there's an advantage that Donald Trump is not the person he was even just 4 years ago. He comes across more as a petulant child who's angry at everything and just negative. And Kamala Harris, as you just described it, has brought a vigor to the campaign that is beyond, I think, what most people imagined. So those ticket splitters, in a funny way, and we were just talking to somebody from North Dakota, was talking about how in the days when Senator Johnson beat, I guess, John Thune by 500 votes or whatever that first election was in 2002, the ticket splitting was more common. But then as time has gone on, when Thune ran again, a couple years later and he won, the ticket splitting, well, you're right, it's diminished. My feeling is that if you've got a presidential where in the old days, if you're president, if you're voting for the person at the top of the ticket and they're really attractive and really exciting, in a place like Montana or Ohio, you can kind of brag to your friends, I voted for Trump, or I was voting, but then you kind of use that to cover the fact that you also voted for Sherrod Brown or John Tester. More to the point, though, John Tester and Sherrod Brown are two of the best senators of either party in the Senate and have deep respect in their home states. And I've been in Ohio at political events and listened to people talk about Sherrod Brown and what he's done for their community and how long he's been helping and how committed a public servant he is. And John Tester, I've only been there once at political events there, but it was breathtaking. He is revered. In many ways, if you look at active farming, he's the last farmer in the United States Senate. Right? This country's been defined by agriculture for 250 years in many ways, and yet he's the last farmer. And again, he's what you see is what you get. He's not going to put, fancy, what do you call it? He would say you're not going to put a fancy dress on a pig, or something close to that. And he said that he tries to deal each issue genuinely in how it affects his constituents. And that's something that people in Montana are going to care about. I think both of them are going to win. I'm happy to take 50-50 bets, even odds bets from anybody in the House.
Well, to that point about what Senator Tester is trying to do, he's obviously trying to carve out his own brand that's separate from that of the National Democratic Party. It's part of the reason why he's not here this week, frankly. We reported this morning in our morning edition newsletter that he's actually doing a fundraiser today, Senator Tester is, with Pearl Jam. He apparently grew up with the bassist for Pearl Jam in Big Sandy, Montana, so it just goes to show you sort of what his priorities are right now and what he's relying on to actually win. I know sort of from my old career as a geologist
and I did all my master's. I studied volcanology and volcanic rocks just north of Yellowstone Park in south central Montana. So I've got a handful of friends that are geologists out there, and 2 or 3 of them are in the mining business, and John Tester has not been exactly friendly to the mining industry, but they love him. They understand why he's supporting his constituents the way he is, and they respect that, that integrity. And I think that's going to matter. I think that, having, again, you've got Kamala Harris and Donald Trump at the top of the ticket. That's a pretty big gap in terms of things like, those old-fashioned values around integrity.
I want to pivot, Senator, to policy. You have been focused throughout your tenure in the Senate on artificial intelligence. Obviously, Senator Schumer has laid out his preferred roadmap for this. He's got some Republican co-sponsors in this effort. Given the likelihood that probably nothing else will get done the rest of this year on the Hill, aside from the must-pass stuff, of course, government funding, the NDAA, what aspect of AI should Congress legislate on first and foremost, assuming it's prioritized in 2025?
Well, that's a long list. I know, and you use the word prioritize, which means I don't get a long list. One of the bills we worked on has come out of the Senate, and it's a terrible name. It's called the VET bill, but it's basically how do we set standards by which artificial intelligence, so that we know what's the watermark look like. So when something is a product of artificial intelligence, people know it. They can tell it. And we've got an organization in the U.S. government called the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and that entity we don't have to create a new institution to do this, to set standards by which we can have a level of confidence that what we're seeing on a computer screen, what we're seeing on a streaming media is the result of artificial intelligence or the result of pure human endeavor.
Yeah, it reminds me of a couple of weeks ago, actually, in the Senate, Leader Schumer and Senator Klobuchar tried to pass legislation that would require disclosure for anything about AI for any political ad for a federal campaign that uses elements of AI, and of course it was blocked on the floor. But it seems like a lot of these efforts on artificial intelligence have to be further developed in order to get enough bipartisan buy-in, number one, or number two, take up the floor time in the Senate, which is a hot commodity these days.
The floor time is there's plenty of floor time.
If you guys don't work Monday to Thursday.
Yeah, exactly.
I know that's not your decision, but
anyway, I think that the hardest thing we're going to have is to prioritize, and AI is the most important thing. I feel an amazing sense of urgency about if I could have my dream, I'd want to do something right around data privacy and data security. I chair the data security subcommittee on commerce, and what's happening right before our eyes is the concentration of wealth created by AI is creating enterprises that are so large and have so many lobbyists that it's going to be almost impossible. Even the most fair-minded legislation that's balanced between Republicans and Democrats won't get passed, because the longer they can keep an open playing field with no regulation at all, no standards of transparency, the more money they're going to make, and they're at such a level that's going to be enormous. So I think that should be if we're going to have, I'm not sure it's doable, but it's not going to get easier, so we should make it a highest priority to do now.
Another policy area we've been discussing a lot today has been this idea of permitting reform. As you know, the Senate Energy Committee recently passed a bipartisan permitting reform proposal from Senators Manchin and Barrasso. Obviously, there's a lot of must-pass legislation between now and the end of the year that's going to take up floor time. It's going to take up, the attention span of the leadership. At this point, do you see it as a possibility that permitting reform could be slipped into maybe one of the must-pass bills, whether it's something on funding or maybe on the National Defense Authorization Act, which, as you know, often includes legislative priorities that have nothing to do with defense?
You said that. I would never say that. Absolutely, there's a chance, and there should be a chance. And again, right alongside AI, I have this incredible sense of urgency that we're out of time. There's one of the things that struck me when I first got to the Senate 3.5 years ago was that there's no business plan for how we're going to address climate change, right? There's no step, here's what we're going to do in the next 3 years, and then 5 years, and 12 years, and 15 years. We're making every decision. These are huge, consequential decisions involving billions of dollars based on that one isolated set of facts. We need a much larger business plan that allows us to, we're going to make a sacrifice at this point so that we get this, and then we make sure that working people can afford to heat their homes and stay cool in the summer. But to do that, we're going to have to build this infrastructure. And we've got I became a geologist because I was an environmentalist. Back when I got my master's in geology, we called it the greenhouse effect. We didn't call it climate change, but it was an all-consuming recognition that if we continued doing what we've been doing, we would have all these problems that would come. It's pretty close to what's happening, and yet we still don't seem to be able to somehow have the willpower to come together and say, all right, roll up our sleeves, how are we going to put a price on carbon, how are we going to do that? And anything to get to a business plan on climate change and to get to where we're going to need to go, we need to build infrastructure to that new future, a positive future. And that infrastructure, there's just a huge number of people that have all kind of built their lives around, not in my backyard, not in my county, not in my state, not in my country. And yet, by any measure, we're going to need more copper. We're going to need more lithium. Even by the wildest imaginations, we could find efficiencies and do more, the recycling of metals. We're going to have more mines. We're going to have to do more extraction. And I think many of the large nonprofit organizations that are focused on the environment recognize this and realize that we're going to have to make some difficult decisions as a country and as a planet about what sacrifices we're going to have to make to win the battle in addressing climate change. And the permitting reform is the classic case. And I think John Barrasso and Joe Manchin worked on it at great levels. But let me just say that I'd say that there's a majority of the Democrats on the Natural Resources Committee. I won't name anybody specifically. I would never mention Senator Heinrich and hold him to a position. But there's a bunch of Democratic senators that support that bill and were involved in the negotiations. It's not perfect. It's going to be a long process of a lot of bills that we don't like. There are parts of it that we're not going to be comfortable with. But if we don't make these compromises and don't make these sacrifices, we're going to be the lobster sitting in the pot as the nature's turning up the flame.
Something you guys are going to have to address next year, regardless of who wins control of what chamber, is the expiration of the Trump-era tax cuts. If Republicans have the trifecta, of course, they'll be able to pass a party-line bill. They'll be able to use reconciliation in the Senate to do that. But if Democrats win just at least one of the three, you guys will have a seat at the table as part of those negotiations on a new set of tax policies. What do you think your party's negotiators should prioritize as part of a potential overhaul of the Trump-era tax program?
Well, I think that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have laid a framework out that is a good approach to look at the issue with. I think there is going to have to be a closer accounting of getting to a balanced budget. What's that going to look like? We can't continue to create the kind of deficits that Donald Trump created, and that, for better or for worse, when we had the pandemic, we needed to make a lot of investments to get us out of that pandemic. And these are investments, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Plus Science Act. You go down those, the Inflation Reduction Act. Those are all crucial legislation that really needed to happen in that time, but there was a contribution to the deficit. So we're going to have to tighten our belts a little bit. But within that, I think the things to remember is we want working families to come first. We want to make sure that the women that can't afford childcare can afford childcare. That people aren't working two jobs just to get by. They're working two jobs to get to a better life. And I think, using those frames, the actual tax changes will be fairly obvious.
Earlier this year, when the Senate was voting on the bipartisan foreign aid package for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, it was a late-night vote, I recall, and you were coming in to the chamber, I remember, and a reporter asked you a question about the holdup, and I remember you getting very passionate about this issue. You were very frustrated that it had gotten to this point, that Republicans had held up aid to Ukraine in particular for as long as they did, after, of course, the border security negotiations had fallen apart. As being someone who's very passionate about that issue, as you clearly are, what do you think is the possibility of Congress being able to come together in early 2025 and potentially pass another Ukraine aid package, given how hard it was last time, number one, and number two, the current aid package is probably going to run dry in early 2025 anyway. So there's going to be a decision for you all to make, again, regardless of which party controls which chamber.
These are too many hard questions. Just kidding. I am passionate, and I believe that when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, he was revealing himself. And I learned a long time ago, if someone reveals himself, believe them. And he's not going to stop at Ukraine. This notion that we're going to be able to back away and things will be fine, they won't be fine. And that's why Europe, who has spent almost 2/3 of the money that between the military aid and the domestic aid to Ukraine to help their lights stay on, the European Union or the rest of the world has provided almost 2/3 of that money. If we allow Putin to succeed in taking Ukraine, or even to keep the land that he's already taken and wouldn't have to give back, what are we saying to all the other dictators and tyrants and strongmen and demagogues around the world? We're saying, yeah, sure, go ahead. Whether you're in Iran or North Korea, play your best hand. If China wants to go after take Taiwan, we're going to be a little more isolationist. It's the worst message we could possibly send. And I'm the first person to think that we've all got to work together around the world on these big issues like pandemics and climate change. We need more diplomats. If you were to ask me one place where a relatively small investment could have big returns, put a few hundred more diplomats on the payroll and get them out there getting results in terms of some of these really difficult negotiations. You've got to find those compromises that maybe nobody likes, but ultimately create progress. And we're not getting there. Anyway, Ukraine, I would come unglued if we roll back on that. And I think there are an awful lot of Republican senators that aren't comfortable in this environment with politics the way they are, of coming forward and talking about this. This is something that the Republican Party used to stand for goodness sakes. And I think one of my dream hopes is that Kamala Harris keeps this momentum and this electricity, and she doesn't just beat Donald Trump, she pummels him. She beats him by 8 points or 10 points, and we put just push MAGA Republic, the MAGA Republican group, which isn't that big. It's loud, but we push them off the stage once and for all, and then we can get back to making decisions around the future of this country that really do benefit everyone and help create a larger, expanding middle class.
All right, I know I've asked you a lot of hard questions, according to you, but I've got an easy one right now for you. You're up for re-election in 2 years. Have you decided whether you're going to run for another term?
That is an easy question. Yeah. I'm one of those people. Joe Manchin had me and Mark Kelly come onto his boat like 5 days after the election in 2020, right before our orientation. And he wanted to make sure that we understood what a dumb job it was.
Good to be convinced to run for Senate, for the record.
That's true. I did. Michael Bennett walked me around Storm Lake, Iowa, and told me about what his day was like and why I should do it. I've been surprised, I've been delighted in a positive way that my experience as an entrepreneur and a small business person, my experience as a scientist. I'm the last real scientist in the Senate. that those experiences in local government as a mayor and as a governor, I think, bring me to a point where I can add value when they're making legislation. When Joe Manchin had myself and Mark Kelly on the boat for pizza and beer that Sunday before the orientation, it was really an audition to see if I was sufficiently bipartisan, if Mark Kelly was sufficiently bipartisan to be part of what he wanted to get done that year, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, CHIPS plus science. And we both passed. So we got to be part of those gangs that put that legislation together. And I thought I could add value having seen as a mayor and as a governor what poorly designed legislation does and how wasteful it can be to local communities, to county commissioners, to general assemblies, and to governors. And there should be more people that are involved in local, municipal politics and governing, and state politics and governing, who got into the Senate so that they bring those experiences with them. So I am definitely going to, I'm only going to do 2 terms, and I've said it first here, 2-term limit, oath of conscience.
All right, clip and save. Made some news here. Thank you very much, Senator. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Please stick around for the toast. Thank you.